Welcome everyone to the first workshop of this year conducted by Hack.Slash. Uh, I am Neil Thakkar, coordinator at DotSlash 5.0, and today give a kickstart to this year, we have with us Ranjoy Sen sir, staff software developer at Collins Aerospace. Ranjoy sir, would you like to give us a short introduction of yourself?
Hey Neil, thank you guys. Happy New Year to everyone, and I'm really thrilled to be at Dot Slash and I'd like to welcome you all to this workshop of PWA. My name is Ranjoy Sen. I'm a staff software developer at Collins Aerospace. Um, so essentially, my day in and day out really goes into architecting various types of mobile and web-based applications. Have an experience of about 15 years. On a regular basis, I kind of contribute towards different types of open source SaaS-based products, and that's what I usually do. Yeah, back to you, Neil.
Yeah, so that's great to listen. So, topic of today's workshop in our series of workshop is progressive web applications. And as a web developer, I must say I always wanted to make mobile apps, so that will be a great session for me also personally. So now the stage is all yours. Uh, you can start the session.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me share my screen.
Yeah, sure.
Please let me know if it is visible. Okay. Um, yep. Welcome everyone. As I said, the today's discussion or point of topic is progressive web apps and how does it is revolutionizing the mobile landscape on a day in and day out basis. As I said, my name is Ranjoy Sen. These are my handlers in Twitter, GitHub. Hit me on these spaces, and we can have a further discussion towards that. Okay. Today's topic is more aligned towards users who are sort of aware of what is PWA, are willing to know what is a PWA. They are somewhat into the web space, want to migrate towards mobile space, or want to see how does their web application can be ported into the mobile space. So we'll talk about various aspects behind that. We'll see how does PWA under the hood works. We'll get to see some more technical details, some UX considerations. What is the design philosophy supposed to be for a PWA? How do you host a PWA? And then we'll go back to a quick demo of one of the applications, and then we'll conclude with any questions if any of you has. Right. So let's start with understanding, users' behavior, or how does any user perceive an application. So I, as a user, right, when I looked into my phone today, it's kind of, I was seeing that I have around 102 applications in my phone, which is consuming around 30% of my phone space. Right. But it was very interesting for me when I was looking into the my Siri suggestions, because my Siri was always giving me almost same sort of results in terms of what applications do I use. Maybe few applications here and there changes at times, but that typically goes to a very important question that I'm not utilizing all my applications, although I do have the application which is kind of holding my space to a larger extent. So and this phenomenon is so common, that there are about 61% of the users follow these kind of problems. So let's discuss a little bit more on that. So what is the user's behavior here? The users, you typically do not want to consume no, a lot of space into the device. Typically, really, you will have a lot of your personal data into your phone, and you don't want to implement, or you don't want to waste them with a lot more applications which you don't want to use it, you don't use over a period of time. And then you play around with handful of applications which is there in your phone, right, on a day in and day out. Most of the times what happens is that many of the installed applications are free versions, and they come up with a lot of advertisements. which hindered as a user's experience, right? You don't get 100% of what you typically want to see in an application. It typically pops in with different types of advertisements every now and then. So that's kind of gives you a bad experience. And for a very simple reason, typically people just forget about what are those applications they have used, or they have downloaded to their phone over a certain period of time, and because they are not utilizing them, they are not using them on a regular basis, they just keep forgetting about them, right? Now, there is a quick reference towards how does the web applications or the web reach versus the user engagement. These are the very typical scenarios where an application really gets shocked, right? So when you say the and then if we plot these two properties in a coordinate sort of x-axis for user engagements and y-axis for the web reach, what we do see on a web application and a mobile application, which is red and blue, in colors, what we see that the mobile applications has got a very low reach in terms of web, which typically means that when you search for some application on the web, you only get to see the URLs which is hosted by your Apple App Stores or the Google Play Stores. But if you really want to increase those reach by increasing your SEO space, you can't typically do that, because that's something which is taken care by Apple and Google, and if any other app store you're using. Versus when you're looking at a user engagement standpoint, what we see has got that mobile application has got a very high percentage of user engagements in comparison to any web application for that matter. On a very simple reason is because of the notification segments, and the way the user comes back to a forgotten application, as I was saying previously, right? That you simply forget about the application what you have used, because there is no engagement which is happening all throughout, right? Now, this is typically a problem of a web application versus mobile application. Now, what we would like to do is rather marry these two things together. What if we can rather marry these two things together and get something which is far more productive in terms of an application enjoyment of building. And hence we get something called PWA. In short, and progressive web application is something which is a buzzword these days, and many players are into this particular world of PWA these days. This is applicable for any kind of device you are in today's world. It could be Chrome, Firefox, if you're on Windows, if you're on Mac, if you're on Linux, any kind of operating systems you are on, you'll be able to get your PWAs done. Um, if you are on IoT space or a mobile space, desktop, Xbox, HoloLenses, PWAs around. And then it has simply got access to your file systems, which is your low level APIs, your cameras, your photos, your contact, Bluetooth, location, all these important low level APIs it has got access to. It has got a very important set of features altogether, and that's what it brings into an important space of this application development arena. um, Now that being said, let's understand PWA in a simple words. What is it, and under the hood, how does it really different from something else? So you have your web sites, right? Typically, they are nothing but then your informational sites, which doesn't have any user logins or user persona specific details. Now from there we get into the web applications, which typically comes with the sign in, and then you get your own specific data along with the others data, right? So personalized contents and some of the advanced features in the web applications. And now progressive web application collects these two things typically. Along with that, it also has got reach towards the notification layer of your phone or your desktop, as well as the offline content you can have. So which means progressive web like applications can work if there is no internet altogether. And in a on a very app specific way, what we want is we want to make our applications very much accessible from our home screen. And in typical words, it says add to home screen, right? And that's something which is available in PWAs. So, having said all these things, PWA really comes with some characteristics, and these are the characteristics which really bring makes PWA as a whole and different from a usual web application. The first one is being responsive, which really means that PWA, when you're building, you cannot think it in terms of only mobile or only web or only tablet. It has to support any resolution, or any real estate for that matter. The user can really move between multiple resolution, but still they should get the exact same experience. That's what being said about the responsiveness. um, a PWA, since it's a web URL, I should be able to pass on this URL via emails, via chats. Can share the email via, let's say, simply generating a QR code for that matter, and then should be able to share with my users, so that they can hit upon that URL and get to that particular page, which can really happen. If you think on a mobile application, that's something which cannot happen, because you cannot share a page inside a mobile application to one of your users. They have to download that application and then have to get into that page, right? That's the difference. PW should be discoverable over internet via your search engines. So let's say that, so that brings in a very important feature, that you can define your own search engine patterns the way you want to bring your PWA up to the search engine indexes, right? That's in your control right now. For a usual application, it's in Google's control, or it's in Apple's control, but here it is in your control. So you can define your search engine pattern in such a way that it can go up in the ranking. And then installable, an application, when we call it as an app, we always want to say that, yes, is it installable? Otherwise, if I go and visit to the web, I can always visit that, but is it something which is accessible from my home screen? Yes, for a PWA it is. It should be installable to your home screen and can be there at any given point of time. You can just tap on it and open it up as like a normal user, right? Normal application. An app like feature, it's not a website, it's an app. So an app has got a very defined UX guidelines, which makes it different from a website. So typically when you're designing your PWAs, you would like to you would like to have your user experiences more like an app rather than like a website. A PWA should be connectivity independent, which means I should still be able to open up and browse my PWA if at all there is no internet connection available, even from my website or from my browser, or if I have installed it, it would typically be available to my phone. So that's the level of details, connectivity independence we can build on PWAs. It should be secure by default, by the way. So PWAs is an important characteristic. It only supports HTTPS. You cannot have an application which runs on HTTP rather. So it has to be secure. Your endpoints need to be secured. Then only the PWA can be built around that. Auto updatable. You see, when we build applications, the very typical feature is that your application consistently goes through updates and feature updates, right? When your version launches, and then your users download those applications, most of the cases they still are on the older one while you are updating your applications to the you know day in and day out. It becomes little critical, to let your users know that, hey, there is a new versions available, please go ahead and download them. There are multiple implications. You might just have updated your security patches, your URL updates, your assets, your UIs, anything and everything. Right. For PW it becomes extremely simple. For PWs, this is something which is like an auto updatable, which means once I have it in the URL, your users are visiting them, even though they have installed the application, they will be auto updated as and when you pushed your new changes to the app. And this is a great feature to have. And then re-engageable, which means, as I was saying, on the user web reach versus user engagement, the graph what we had, where the web application has got a very low engagement ratio, that One of the reason is that once I have a web application, I don't go back to them. The simple reason behind that, there is nothing which is pulling me off, right? I am, once I've used it for a certain reason and I forget about it. That typically happens for any application for that matter. But if I want to bring in more like a notification sort of a feature, so as a developer, I can put some notifications which can bring the user back to my application time and time again, right? That's something which is possible with PWAs now. And then progressive, which means really means that so let's say that you are building a game. That game is about, let's say, 200 MB. I'm just giving a hypothetical scenario. In that 200 MB, um, when your users play around with with that application, they are not supposed to download that 200 MB application in one shot, which typically happens for any other app rather. You can't have a shallow piece of an application download to your phone and play around with it. You have to have the entire application downloaded. But for progressive applications, you can still have only that page which you are actively working on, and then as and when you are progressively going to another pages, your pages would keep get downloaded to your phone, and hence your space won't be consumed to a larger extent. So these are the very typical 10 characteristics which any of the PWAs should follow. Having such great features in place, there are some very early adoptions of PWAs from some of the giants of today's world. Giants like Starbucks, Flipkart, who are typically the e-commerce sites, Pinterest, Twitter Lite, some of the social sites, and Z5, like one of the streaming platforms, and Forbes being one of those news sites. They have seen a very good results, having migrated from the usual web applications to the PWAs, which has got pretty high demand in terms of the users engagement altogether. And you can read more about such statistics at pwastats.com. And the world is your, please take a look at them. Right. So having such great features, some very early adoptions, some of the biggest players who are utilizing PWAs. If that's something which excites you, we can get into some of the technical details so you can understand how you can develop PWAs today for your usual web applications. So PWA really has some principal assets. This is where when we start developing a PWA, right? So PWA is under the hood, comes out of three things, right? So you have your HTML pages, you have your JavaScript, which is your building block in terms of logic, and your CSS files, which is nothing but your style sheets, right? Along with them, there are other things which really comes in, and which we call it as a PWA principal asset. The first one is the web app manifest, and we'll get through all of this in details little later on. The second one is service worker. Then we have app shell, app icons, and the startup images. Right, these are the five principal assets what a PWA should have. Let's get through what is something called a web application manifest. Now, manifest is as simply as a collection of details what an application is all about, to be very honest. For example, it has got a name of your application, some of the details, what is kind of a background color, what kind of icons it is using, what kind of startup images it is using, theme color, some of the description, some of the startup URLs, and all those details, right? And then that manifest gets attached to your index HTML file, as simple as that. And then once we have it, your browser will be able to understand that, hey, I have these details, and I can start hooking up these details to something like, when an application launches from your home screen, it will start with a splash screen, right? What you see in a usual application or an app. And then you can have it accessible from your home screen of your phone. The icons, what is there, it's basically comes from the detail of icons what you provide to them. And there are various resolutions of images, for a higher resolution phone to a lower resolution phone, and then your desktops and stuff like that. So you provide all these assets, and your web app manifest would be ready for you in minutes. The next one is service worker, which is predominantly the most important part of a PWA. But before we understand what is a service worker, let's understand what is typically a worker works, right? Now, this picture, what you're seeing right now, is a usual web application, right? And at any given point of time, when you hit upon a web application, this is what typically happens. It basically, so you basically go and say xyz.com, for example. It goes and pulls it out the first page, which typically the index page, right? The moment you have the index page, and you start play around with your web pages, right? You tap on that, you swipe on that, you click on that. There are some internal events which happen, the on load event, the on push event, and so on and so forth, right? So whenever these events get kicked in, they are pushed into something called a callback queue. This is more likely a first in first out sort of a stack where the events are pushed. But the moment you have this stack ready, we have something called event loop. The moment you have event loop takes each event and pushes to something called a call stack. Now, the moment you have something called a call stack, your events may be heavy in nature in terms of operational timing. Your maybe events may be very simplistic, like a tap or a alert message, right? Very simple. Now, when any of these operations get performed, how they really performed is they catch hold of the main thread of your browser, and typically your browser has got only one main thread. They catch hold of this main thread, and hence they do one the call stacks takes one event at a time, and then take the thread, does the operation, freeze it out, and then takes the another one. That's what happens all the time. And hence one of the reason why, if your browser is stuck for a moment, you might be experiencing, because there is an event which is taking far more time consuming or resource consuming in terms of CPU usage, because it's taking your main thread. Your web page is blocked, right? And then you tend to refresh it again just to see something else is happening, but that's what it happens under the hood. Now, to mitigate this particular problem, right, we have something called web workers. Now, web workers works on something called a worker thread. What is a worker thread? It's typically a concept which is there in many of the languages, which is called threads, a separate thread, where you create another thread for your job. You take one work from there, push to another thread, let that thread do the job, and then gives you back whenever that work is done, right? And then that kind of post message back to your application saying that, hey, I am done with my job now, if you want to take up something else or want to utilize me for something else, right? So that's what really happens to the worker thread. And if you have a resource intensive job, that's where you would like to use a worker thread for that matter. A service worker works on the same principles, but works on something called the network request proxy. Typically, if you have a network request, a network request can be for various purposes. It can be for an image download, an API call, a very basic web page call. It could be anything for that matter, something which we are pulling off from our application servers, right? That's where our network request really comes in to picture, and that's where service worker comes in and consider some of the and can get utilized to do some of the heavy intensive job of pulling out those data and then doing it into a separate thread. Now, how does service worker works? Because now we have come to some sort of understanding about how does a worker works, how does an application works, and how does a service worker really reacts. Let's say, how does it work really? Now, when I was saying that when you open up a web browser and hit upon some of your favorite websites, it typically goes through your network layer and pulls in your index HTML from your application server. And the moment, if if that page is ready for you, if that page is accessible, it comes back with HTTP OK 200 request, and that page is visible to your web browser. Now, the scenario gets typically different when there is no network. Let's say that your browser is unable to access your network via your your phone's network or your desktop's network via your Wi-Fi connections. Now, in that particular scenario, what happens is that since it's unable to reach, your browser really comes back and gives an offline page. In Chrome, this is the offline page what you get. In typical any other browsers, you get something else. Now, service worker really comes in between your network proxy and your web pages and your web pages. What really happens is that when you request for a page, service worker comes because service worker start listening towards whatever the request your network proxy you're making, and then it comes to service worker first, and then service worker further makes the request to your network, or to your application servers. The moment you get those data, service worker starts caching those details, right? And then your browser served from the service worker, not directly from your application server. Hence, what typically happens is that if your application or your web browser is unable to reach to the internet, your service worker plays as a network proxy and able to serve you with all the cached pages or all the default data what you have. It could be anything for that matter. It could be a data, it could be a network data, it could be an API data, it could be images, it could be web pages, it could be your application logic, anything for that matter. It's really depends upon how you design your service worker to get those details and then pulls in into your web application. Hence, even if it is a off network situation, your service worker plays a role and you get to see the pages at least. Now, when you design a service worker, there are typically four important features, or typically four important scenarios which you need to keep in mind while you design your service worker, or while you think of utilizing service worker for one of your use cases. Service worker has got a uh, can access your clients only under its scope. So which typically means that I can't have my service worker for abc.com can access a service worker of xyz.com, right? Because it's a different scope altogether. So abc.com can only access the service workers, can only access the files which is been cached by abc service worker for that matter. It cannot access anything else. Now, the second one is service worker cannot work if your domain is not HTTPS. That's the predominant feature. Well, to test, now you might be thinking that I am not building a, I may not have a domain right away when I'm developing. Yes, so you can have your local host, is always considered to be secure. So service worker, all the features of service workers and PWAs can be tested on local host as well. The maximum scope of a service worker is inside the location of the worker. So let's say that I have the worker JS inside the content. The worker JS can only access whatever file inside content, cannot go typically away from that folder, right? That's my parent folder, is my content, is my parent folder. I cannot go beyond that. So that's the scope. And most importantly, service worker cannot access your DOM layer, which means that, let's say that you have a web page and you want one of your table data to update, via service worker, right? That cannot happen. So service worker can only do the background activities, can only give you the data back, but how you would like to utilize the data is purely your logic. You take the data and update your UI. And in typical world, the main threads are only applicable for the UI activities. Some of the sub threads are not really allows any of the any of the UI activity to perform. Right? That's a universal truth across multiple applications. The second one we want to talk about is the application shell. Now, what it is, all right? Um, when you develop an application, your application really, and I'm typically on the user front, or from the UI front, we typically deal with four things. The first one is your HTML pages, your JavaScript pages, which is your business building blocks, your CSS style sheets, and your data. Your data predominantly to be could be a static data, could be dynamic data. Um, Depends upon what is your application is all about. Now, instead of mixing and merging all of these things together, which typically happens on an SSR or a server-side rendered applications, we would like to separate these things out, because we want some of our business logic or some of the thing which is cacheable to be cached by the service worker for our application. Then only then only my application would be available offline. Hence, um, let's say that you have your home page, you have your menu standards, your CSS classes and everything else, right? This is something which is typically comes in as an application shell, which really means that if you do not have the data, how does your application would look like, right? It should be still functional with something which is basically available to your app. The data is kind of comes to your application through APIs like your REST APIs or POST APIs or your GraphQL APIs. So that's totally separate. So try to separate out your application logic from your data logic, right? That's what it's called, application shell. Well, having all these supports, there is some very good support for PWA across multiple browsers, across different operating systems, different devices. As you can see, most of the bricks are green, which typically means that yes, you can safely think that yes, I can develop a PWA and it should still be, I will have my users on some or the other environment, and they should still be able to access the features what I'm building. The features like add to home screen, offline contain, theme colors, theme colors, service workers, and then the push API, which is nothing but the push notification. Now, Push API has got a limited feature for Chrome, but do not have enough support for Safari as of yet. But hopefully, in future, they might just come up with more features on that. But otherwise, if you have your users more on the desktop environments and your Android environments, then you can safely assume that you can utilize push notifications for your PWAs. Now, that's been technical. That's about business logic and building blocks. But UX plays a significantly important role in a PWA. The simple reason behind that is that you are playing around with the UX standards, right? So how you can engage your users who are, which is not like a normal website but rather than an application like. So you need to concentrate a lot more on the UX level considerations. Um, and then the very first important thing which comes in along with your PWAs is making the installable option visible somewhere into your application, so that it's really visible on the front for your end users to say that hey, this is the PWA and this is installable. If you want, you can install them, or you can even play around with it over the browsers. But if you want, you can install them. So what are those good places to have that install button visible? One of those, and these are some of the tested options. One of them is your landing page. If you have a landing page, you definitely have a landing page of your application. There you can make the install option available. If you have a header of your application, that is a good place to show. If you have feeds which is popping up every now and then, along with those feeds, you can have your install feature saying that hey, this feed is offline, available, just install the application. You can read this feed offline. um, if you are building a game, then you can still have your install option at the end of the journey. For example, where you're showing your users a score, there you can have your install option popped up saying that hey, this is installable, go and install this application. And then menu is always a very good place to show, because most often people go to menu more than once during the course of the user's engagement of that particular application. So that's a very good place where you can showcase your install option. Now, it doesn't really matter how well you have structured your design schemas, your users, your business logic. But if you are building a design which looks like this really doesn't serve the purpose of any kind of an application, because irrespective of whichever devices my users on, they won't be able to utilize this application or utilize any of these features. Instead of that, what you should exercise more is a mobile first design, where we should always start thinking that the moment I share a URL, a link, um, most often my users will be on mobile phone. They would rather like to visit my application on mobile first, rather than they would go on, open up their tablets or their desktops, and then they will visit that, right? So every single application what you try to implement as in PWA, it must be designed as mobile first design approach. Now, that was more on the UX guideline standpoint. Now let's talk a little bit more about one of the extremely important features of PWAs, which is the offline experience, and why we want to enforce, or rather, why a PWA as a whole ecosystem enforces offline experience for their end users. Now, in as Google says that they would definitely want to raise the bar for offline capabilities of their PWAs, and going forward, if your applications is not supported for offline usage, you won't even see that PWA icon for Google Chrome devices. All right, that's an important place to make sure that yes, your application is something which is a PWA. That icon really pops up in a Chrome. You won't like to miss that feature. So offline is important. And offline is important? Because even in today's world, there are about 63% of the users who are on 2G network. So typically when you are on 2G network, you won't have your users to download a huge file always, right? And then making sure that they won't be accessing your website or in your application always on internet. So if they are offline, they should be able to access them. But what exactly why offline is important? What are the factors for a bad network connection? Typically there are four. The first one is the poor network coverage. You are into a network, you are on a high speed zone, but your area is not covered under a well network coverage zone, right? That's typically one of the reason. Weather conditions typically plays around for bad conditions of your networks, and that's beyond your control. Power outage, let's say that you are into your Wi-Fi zone. There's a power outage, and then your Wi-Fi goes for a toss. You are in between an important part of your application, and then until there is an internet, your users won't be able to use them. So that's one of the reason why you would like to implement offline features. And traveling from a network zone to a no network zone altogether. You are traveling at this point of time where you have very good coverage where you're traveling, and then as in when you're moving towards your journey, you are getting into a totally no network zone. So there also you would like to give your users a very good experience in terms of your application. So that's one of the reason why you would like to implement offline features. But how? What is that you would implement to make sure that yes, your users are good with offline? A simple fact is cache by default, right? It typically says that um, make sure that your application shell is out of the box cached to your phone, and some of the data which is typically you know uh, get accessed on a very frequent basis by the user, you can cache them out. For example, if you're making a feed application, maybe the day's feed you might want to make it offline, as and when, because that particular feed may not go on, may not get updated over a period of time. So that's a good place to make it offline or make it cacheable. Let's say that you are building a form, right? And in many of the scenarios, the forms are complex. It typically lets user to fill a lot more details. Now that would be a bad experience for the user if it fills out almost at the end and goes off from the network. So the moment you are filling out your form, probably you would like to cache those data what the user has filled in, and then the moment network comes back, you might want your users data to send back to the API, through the API, so that they do not lose the data. And that's typically one place where you lose your users engagement. So you might want to implement offline features for that. um, Prefetch content, for example, if you are building again a feed or a blog or a site data, right? And then your users are viewing something which they have seen previously, they are scrolling. If there is a new content available, you might want to fetch the data at the back, and then show to your users saying that, hey, there is a new content available, would you like to refresh, and see how does it go? Because you may not want your users to keep refreshing. And instead of keep refreshing, um, make a frequent or make a periodic fetch content via your backend, and then make the data available for your end users. Data safe mode is a very important feature what your application should have. For example, if you have a data intensive application, for example an image for that matter, you may not want your users to download maybe a 5 MB or a 10 MB image on the fly, right? Because that particular images will take a good amount of bandwidth, and if it is a image based application, then definitely it will choke a lot more data of your users. Instead of that, what you might want to do is look into what type of network zone your users are, and only provide a very very low resolution image, and let your users know that, hey, they can go ahead and download that image if they really want. Or based on, if your users are on a high internet zone, you might want to download that image. If they are on low network zone, you might want to showcase a very low bandwidth image. That can be also done. If you are building a video intensive application, for example a learning platform, right? You might want your users to let those videos downloaded, and then view them whenever they find it free. Because you might have a situation that your users are again on a high network zone. They might want to download that video for their offline viewing. So that's one of the places where you would like to implement some sort of a offline mode for your end users. Cool. So having all this implemented, mm, with all these technical details, having a great interface for your application, making your application with all the offline features. Where do you host? How do you host? Right, so it's simple, it's easy. If you are having an https domain, that's by default can be a PWA if you have considered service worker. Then and your browser is able to get g- your browser is able to understand that, yes, this is a PWA, and it has got all the characteristic which is required. Then it by default comes in as a PWA, and then your users can straight away download the application from the same URL. If not, you still have another option which is called TWA trusted web activities. You might want to create a file, an APK for your web application, and then submit it to the Google Play Store, is to make sure that your application is also getting listed to the Google Play stores. Just maybe you might want to increase your user base on only the mobile sites and not on our desktop sites. So in that particular case, TWs are a good place to showcase. Well, that's been said. There are some there is a demo which I have prepared. Maybe you would like to take a look at that. You might want to go to this URL or look into this QR code. It will be You'll be straight given to eventgrid.rollingarray.co.in. And all the codes of this particular application is already hosted on GitHub. You might want to visit that as well. So let's see how does it go now. Okay. Okay, let me get my things prepared. Okay, let's see. Okay, so on my left hand side, I have the application as the desktop, and on my right hand side, this is my phone. In both the cases, you might want to visit. What can happen is that I can go and quickly look into visit this URL, and if I open up this particular icon, what I have an option for installing my PWA. I'll just refresh it once, and this icon gets popped up. Right, it says that install your PWA. The other option is that from your application, you can also write predominant logic to check whether your application is installed to the user's device or not. Um, for example, you might want to do some analytics based on how many users have installed your application as an app, and how many of them are visiting your applications as the usual website, right? Because based on that, you might want to increase your user engagement to a certain extent. So in that way, you can do it. I can tap on that, it will open up the same thing. I can go and install them. The moment I do that, it opens up the application in my Mac as a usual application. And as you can see, that option which was available here is no more there. um, right, and then this been said that this application is an install application, and now all these features of your offline web content and everything is always available here as well. Apart from that, if you want to, okay, let me close this. Okay, so as you can see, if I want to open up my Chrome browser, right? Okay, so here let me go and make it. I can go and go to the options, and from here I can just say that install options, right? Um, but what I'll go is I'll go and make my phone as offline. Go into airplane mode. The moment I'm into airplane mode, I am seeing that my application, it says that you are offline, and I can predominantly go and research once more. Uh, as you can see that I was offline, but I was still able to get the exact data, and these are the data which is coming out of the API. So even I was offline, I'm still being able to get the data. What I can do is I can go make it available. The moment I have it, if my network is on, I should still be able to get the details back. um, and then if there is an app update which is happening, I should still be able to get it there. Now that's about the demo. Let's get into a little bit of code, right? How does PWA as a whole works? You might want to visit that GitHub link. However, let me give a little quick instructions about how you can develop any application for that matter. I'm using Angular here. You can utilize any of your favorite frameworks, React, Views, or even if you have a bare bone JavaScript application, you can still convert it as in PWA. But what happens under the hood is these are the three important pieces. Let's take a look at that a little bit more. So what am I saying is that I am saying that on the first part, I'm saying by index HTML, my fav icons, my manifest, and any CSS and JavaScripts is something which is cacheable for me. I'm saying that Any of the images are typically cacheable for me. And I'm also saying that any of the URLs which I want to cache, for example, this is an API URL for me. If I want to cache it, I would like to cache this particular data. And hence, when your application gets built, your www folder, there a file gets generated which is called nsw ngsw JSON file. This file, if you closely look into it, has got the URLs of all the files which has been generated by via your build generator. And hence here also you can see what are those files which has been there, what are the assets which are kind of cached, what are those APIs which are cached, and all those details. And hence, if you can see, there is something called MD5 hash. This particular hash is important file, because what happens is that if, let's say that you are updating one of your business logic and your application is getting rebuilt and you're redeploying your application, PWA as a whole, what it's able to do is it's able to understand if there is a MD5 hash which has updated for me, and if it has been updated, then it's considered to be an update for your end users, because end your application, both if you have installed the application as well as if you have if you are browsing the application, because at any given point of time your browser is caching the files, and if there is an update available, your browser will still go ahead and um, update, look for that file update through your manifest, and then all those updated files will be re-available to your browser so that you can get the latest piece of code. So a quick browser bug fixing is an important thing. You would like to make it available for your end users quickly, right? These are the cases where PWA is really really handy. Okay, let's go back to a little bit more. So now, having said with all this, is PWA the right choice for you, right? That's the question we want to answer at the end of the session. um, Now this session is not this session is not for moving away from the native development. No, that's not the that's not the reason. That's not the reason for building PWAs. You should still be able to utilize your Android apps or your iOS apps for the type of applications what you're building. But if at all you have any of these 10 requirements, you might start looking at considering PWAs as one of your choice. For example, if you want to have a mobile friendliness for your application, yeah, this is something which you are deciding before your choice of platform, right? If you want to make it installable, if you want to make it SEO indexed or offline mode, have it as push notifications, location based services if you want to enable, then you might want to choose PWAs as one of your pieces, because let's say that SEO indexing is not something, as I was saying, is not something which is in your hand for the other native application. However, PWA, since it's a typical website, this is in your control. You can take a call of how well you want to create your SEO indexing. If you want to bypass marketplace, then you have no choice but to go by PWS, because otherwise you are into the marketplace of either your Apple or Google. If you're on a low network data mode, let's say that your application is heavy in size, it has already grown 100 MB, 100, 200 MB with all your data, your cache data what you have, right? In that particular case, if you put it into a marketplace, then your users will take time to download, and more often than not they might just knock it off in between they are downloading. That happened to many users, that happened to me as well. I don't download an application which is very heavy, because simply I don't want to waste my phone size as well. So there PWA is a very good choice. um, Updates, if you are have want to have a very frequent update to your applications, instead of having native applications, you might want to have a PWA as one of your choice, because there your users do not have to bother about whether my application is updated or not. As and when you're releasing your features, your end user will get those features, right? No matter what, no matter at what level they are, what devices they are. um, uh, PWA service worker takes care of taking your applications updated. So that's a very good place. Otherwise, there are many cases when I have built APIs where I have specifically blocked APIs for my end users, while they will not be able to access or use an old application until and unless they are updating their apps. Right, so that's one of the ways, and kind of an older way. You can still go via PWs if that kind of a thing what you have. Shareable and linkable, important feature. If you have an API, if you have an app internal pages, if it you want to share, that's a very good way to go via PWAs. Because that's something where your URLs are available. You can share them via your links, via your emails or chats, and then your end users will be able to access them. So these are the areas where you have a choice apart from your native developments as well, as in PWA, and the choice would be always yours. But when you are developing something, try to ask these questions, and get these questions answered before you take a step towards the platform. Because at many cases, we develop things first and then ask the question that where am I want to go after that, right? That's kind of a wrong way of doing things. And more specifically, I would be also spending a lot of time in choosing that. So ask these questions. If PWA is right for you, go via that. With that, kind of reached to the end of the session. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer. You can get in touch with me in LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter. Look into some of my open source projects in my GitHub. Most of them are public repositories. Get to see all the open source projects which I'm working right now. Yep.
Yeah, there are some questions on our comment sections. So first one is
Sure.
from Astral. I guess you can see the questions are being
Uh,
flashed.
okay. When the single-threaded model becomes more ineffective when scaling our PWAs or larger audiences. Yes, single thread is always ineffective when we are building large-scale application. You must always utilize your web workers or your service workers. Web workers typically to move your application or move your business logic from a single-threaded mode to a more sub-threaded mode, so that your users are not hold by, or your browsers is not hold by an overwhelming CPU responses. You must utilize or exercise subthreads to make larger or scalable applications.
There is one
On
more
PWA
from Fitness
compared to
Folk.
native apps? Well, no. Well, in my experiences, so I have started implementing native applications back in 2007. So it's been close to 15 years. I have been working both on native iOS applications as well as PWAs. What I have seen is back when about 5 years back, the story was totally different. I myself wouldn't recommend PWAs or web applications for any of my end customers. But today, when I look into my applications, I typically see which platform or how do I make the users engagement more, and then make my code more scalable, make it more shareable. In that way, PWAs are really good. And no, they are not slower. They are not slower in comparison to the native applications. Well, yes, one definite question is that it also depends upon your device which you are using it. Your native applications are straight away connected to your or hooking up to your native layers. So if you are accessing a heavily intensive native layer application, then yes, there is no second thoughts about you should go native. But if you are more at the network layer, where you're making more at the data level, data intensive job, or making more API calls, PWA is a choice which you would like to take a look. However, every single questions cannot be answered right away at the beginning. So you might want to take a progressive step towards whether, if I'm choosing PWAs, is it a good choice for me? If it is not, then definitely I might want to switch back to native mode.
There is one more from Keshav.
Yeah. Do PWA uses cache storage? Yes, it uses cache storage, to a certain extent, that your PWAs are hooked on by the service worker. The job of service worker itself is to cache the files what you want to cache for your end users, and that's how you make it offline, right? That's how your files are available to your browser end of the day. It's not accessible anywhere else by your operating systems or by any other application, but however your browsers would be able to cache them out. The demo which I was showing, that I went on a totally offline mode and I still refreshed my screen, and I was able to get the application, I was able to get the data. The way I was able to get is, my applications end to end is cached by my browser, my data is cached by my browser. So as long as I am on an offline, the browser will still work with the last sync data. The moment I go online, my browser will be able to understand that yes, I am on an online mode, and I would need to work with a updated application, updated data. That's where PW utilizes cache storage.
So moving on to the next question from Pawan.
Yep. Are there any frameworks, libraries to render our PWAs on the server side, to listen to the process needs? Yes, you can actually. So, as I was saying, PWA has got nothing to do with the frameworks of choice or library of your choice. It is totally up to you how you would like to, utilize any of the libraries. I am a very high heavy usage of Ionic as a framework, and Angular as a Ionic as a platform, and Angular as a framework. I would say that makes my life fairly easy in terms of whenever I want to build an application which is cross-platform, or I want to straight away get into the PWA mode. I utilize Ionic as a platform, but the choice is yours. You might want to utilize any of the frameworks or libraries if you want to build your PWS, and that will definitely make your life fairly simpler, because in that case you don't have to manually write those JSON files which you want to cache, and the framework will do that for you. Does PWA has Play Store, App Store support? PWA doesn't have an App Store support, but um, PWA has got a support from Google, which is called Trusted Web Activities. So what really happens is that, let's say you are building a hybrid mobile application. You are still utilizing you're still utilizing a native or a native layer. You're still utilizing your browsers to hold all your web pages, right? And that's when you develop it, you make an IPA or an APK, and you put it to your app store or a Play Store. For PWAs, trusted web activities, what happens is that Google makes it as an IPA, and then you can push that file and host it to your Play Store, just in case you want to attract only the Android users, or more specifically the mobile users. You want to go by that. If no, are there any security or privacy risk? As they will not. I Can I get that question once more, please? Yeah. As they will not be undergo security
Yes.
checks by stores. Yes. There. So typically, until you go until you go by the checks of Apple, you are free to develop the way you want to develop. To be very honest, there is no security checks, uh, but rather what you would like to do, is you would like to develop your applications on HTTPS, definitely. And, because PWAs will not support HTTP mode, so you cannot develop an application, put into HTTP world, and then let your user use it. No, it will not be allowed. It has to be an HTTPS. So the moment you have an HTTPS end URL, it is considered to be secure in terms of data usage. So that's one of the security, workaround you can have. But apart from that, there is no privacy risk is something which nobody or no third party authority is taking care of. It's something, as an application developer, but you take care of that.
I guess there were only these questions, and
Cool.
thanks a lot for being here. It was surely a very informative section, and PWA is a very good tool to have pros of both web and apps and cons of none. So it was a very knowledgeable session for me also personally. Thanks a lot for
Awesome,
being here.
awesome. Awesome. Thank you for having me here. I really loved the way you guys are doing dot slash, and I hope you guys do far more better hackathons in future too. PW as a whole, as I am saying that, my way of thinking in terms of mobile application has changed. The when I started looking into PWAs, it has really high heavy potentials for many of the important applications to be developed in future. And I would like to see any new application which, as an audience, you guys are implementing. Do let me know. Hit up on my Twitter. I would definitely like to see them. Thanks a lot. Have a great day ahead.
Yes, sir, we'll surely let you know. And
Yep.
for our audience uh, who have not registered yet, 4th of Jan is the last date to register, and idea submission phase is still going on. So you can check out our website and register on Devfolio. And happy hacking. Thank you for being patient, audience.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.